Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And before we really get into the topic of the video, just to throw this out there really fast, I didn't put out an event quest video this past week because, well, there wasn't really anything new, so there was nothing new to cover. So in the background's footage of me actually doing the event quests from this week, which we've seen before, but I figured it'd make good background footage to talk about some of the issues with Monster Hunter Wilds as it seems. Alright, so as far as I'm concerned, there are two general categories of criticisms for Monster Hunter Wilds at this point. There's debatable criticisms, and then there's just objectively faulty things with the game. So we'll save the objective problems for later. First, let's hit some of the debatable stuff. And we'll get the one that's probably the easiest to predict my view on from the get-go. Game difficulty. A lot of people complain about the difficulty. A lot of people always complain about high-rank Monster Hunter difficulties. Is this easier than, say, Monster Hunter DOS or Try or 4 from the get-go? Probably, yeah. But a lot of that is due to another criticism that we'll address in just a minute. Realistically, it's not a difficult game, but once you have had time to get used to a single Monster Hunter, or in the modern era, if you're coming from something like Elden Ring or any of the Dark Souls series or just any sort of really hardcore game like that, like Lies of P, you're probably not going to find a high rank only version of Monster Hunter all that difficult until it has actually had pretty much all of its content updates. And back in the day, there's a lot of people that always skip the high rank entries, that they would just wait until the G rank version managed to make its way to the West, and that would be the version of Monster Hunter they would play, and they would just stick with the previous game until that one came out. So like in this instance, that would be sticking with Sunbreak until whatever the expansion for Wilds comes out. Or waiting until Wilds is so far into its life cycle that there's maybe only one more patch left to get before picking it up. The argument in favor of picking up a Monster Hunter game from the beginning rather than towards the end is, even though you have less content, there's generally a bigger online player base. So if you really want to experience the online part at its peak, you need to get in early. If you're not concerned with playing with other people, wait until late when there's more content and generally more challenging in-game content, then waiting till later in the cycle is the better idea. There will be hard fights added into Wilds eventually. They're starting to get there now with some of the 8-star Apex monsters. That stuff's actually posing a little bit more of a challenge. I wouldn't go so far as to say it makes the game hard, but I really don't think anything in high rank, aside from maybe some sort of alternate end boss that they come up with in the final patch, is going to be terribly difficult. Like, if the rumors are accurate that they're going to introduce Gogmazios at some point, he might be a legit challenge. But even in 4, I think it was when he was introduced, even in that one, when you played the base version of it, he wasn't really all that hard. It wasn't until you did some of the harder versions of the quest that he actually got challenging. Like the just basic Gogmazios just wasn't that challenging. And that's the way this game is. A lot of the high rank stuff is just not that hard. I don't think it is actually a problem with the series as it is maybe a problem with sticking with such an old design philosophy for the series. I think the issue may be not so much that this game is too easy, but that the starting out with a high rank only version of the game and then doing the G rank expansion later on might be an outdated model. But we'll get to that in just a minute because that's going to require a little bit of elaboration. So overall, I actually don't think the difficulty is that bad. I think Rise was as easy or easier.
Got something in mind?
I think it's just a matter of it not being that far into the patch cycle for the game. Now, in-game build variety. I've seen a couple comments on that pop up here and there. Not a lot, like really difficulty and one other thing that we're going to get to in the actually a legit not debatable problem thing are the only things that I really see pop up a lot. But I do see some people complain about in-game variety, and realistically, this one, while it may not have a huge variety in terms of armors that you can wear, this has probably the best weapon variety in-game of any Monster Hunter that I've played. There are a couple weapons where there is a singular best one, and one of the weapons happens to be one of the ones that I play. Like, although they're slowly pushing away from that. The variety, even if you don't like the RDN weapons, there are several that you can make to actually provide you something to do. If you really don't like the RDN weapons, realistically, you can use some of the in-game monster weapons. You're just going to add a little bit of time to your fights. So if you're min-maxing, yeah, you have to go with RDN weapons or whatever the singular best one is for your particular weapon class. But realistically, like most of the other games, each weapon category had one specific best weapon. And it was either elemental or non-elemental. Most of the like slower weapons, you generally went with non-elemental approaches, and whatever the highest raw to affinity ratio weapon was, that was the one you went with, and you never made anything else. I remember sticking with the Diablo Strong Arm for what felt like forever in base world. Some of the games were a handful of weapons where you could viably make elemental, which wasn't that common in older Monster Hunter games. Most Monster Hunter games, elemental builds have not really ended out lasting too long in terms of saying as part of the meta. There's a couple where elemental was the choice to go with, but for the most part, raw has been heavily favored for the last several Monster Hunter games. So actually having one where elemental is an okay alternative is nice. Weapon variety feels better to me in this one than it has in any of the other games that have come out in a while. So that's my thoughts on in-game variety. I actually think there's a decent variety in builds right now. I think that's probably going to do nothing but improve, because it seems like what they've been doing with weapons adjustments is trying to push the ones that do just settle on a singular weapon towards being able to use other weapons, rather than trying to make one particular playstyle stand out as the singular best. So, the last of what I would consider a debatable criticism is that there's too many quality of life changes. And I would say realistically this needs to be broken down into artificial difficulty or immersion breaking. What do I mean by that? Well, in the older games, one of the things that sort of reinforced the idea that you were a hunter was that you had to plan out your loadout well before you went into the fight. You had to know exactly what you were going to do. You had to know if you needed so many open slots so that you could continue to craft extra materials as you went. Like, say, for example, it wasn't terribly uncommon when you got into G-rank fights in older games to bring, you know, your full set of basic potions and mega potions, but also bring a full suite of honey and the stuff to make more basic potions so that you could make the potions and then upgrade them to mega potions. And you would bring a max potion and an ancient potion just to have as emergency buttons, as well as bringing all the stuff that you needed to boost your stamina back up to max. Now, you forget some stuff, just run away a little ways, port back to your base camp, or just anywhere where you've got a camp set up, grab your stuff out of the tent, you run out of materials, go back, restock. There is an argument to be made that being able to go back and restock is good, but there's also an argument to be made that having some restrictions on what you do when you set out on the hunt actually does add to the value of the fight. A good example of this would be the Raging Brachydios fight. If each fight sort of had a point where when you got to that point, the only way to really get away from the monster was to die, or at least with some of the harder fights in the game. Like, let's say you're fighting the Apexes, and when you follow Ray Dow back to his little lightning prism area, that could be sort of his final area. When you go in there, it seals you off, and the only way to get out is to die. That would be kind of cool. I actually do think there is a happy medium to be had between, say, being able to restock completely at all times versus only really being able to take with you what you have. Because if you really want to talk immersion, if you run out of supplies in the middle of a hunt, it wouldn't be that immersion breaking for a hunter to go to a base camp of some sort, pick up more supplies. They needed to go back out and just find the monster again. Now, one of the things that does seem to have damaged immersion is the secrets auto-tracking the monster. You don't have to do anything to build up the skill to find it. I think that was a misstep. I think what they should have done is kept the rudiments of the tracking system from World, So in other words, monsters leave little traces and stuff that you can go and pick up for some research points and all that. But instead of it being that you level up your research on the monster and it can kind of degrade over time, once you've leveled it up to a certain point, it just stays leveled up. And you have to research the monster up to a certain point before you permanently unlock the ability to just auto home in on it on the secret. I think that would make a lot more sense than having the secret able to just pursue them right out the bat. So I do think they went a little too far towards from quality of life on that one to actually just getting rid of some of the immersion portion. Now, artificial difficulty to me would be things like hot and cold potions. All they're really doing is making sure that you watch for a buff to either fall off after a couple minutes or remembering to put it on. And realistically, the punishment for them is so minor that for the most part, you can kind of ignore it. The hot one less so than cold. Like cold's just stamina management. As long as you got your stamina maxed out, you're probably going to be alright anyway, unless you're trying to use something like maximum might. But I don't think hot and cold drinks are absolutely necessary. If they really wanted to bake heat and cold into the game as a mechanic, they should actually require that that's a skill that's only on armor pieces. And you have to pick up certain armor pieces for particular environments. Or like say if you're wearing a warm armor set in a hot area, you get the heat effect. Or if you're wearing a very light armor set in a cold area, you get the cool effect. And maybe you can use the drinks to offset those. So if your armor category would land as like heavy, then you need something to help cool you off if you're going to a hotter place. Or if your armor set would land as light, you need something to help warm you up if you're going to a cooler area. I think that would be fair. That might actually help with the immersion, but realistically they could make it so the buff is so long it would last you for an entire hunt. A once a hunt thing to balance out some of the immersion stuff, not that terrible. What's the point of really putting it in at that point? Yet again, just immersion. I don't think that it actually adds anything to the difficulty of the game. And I'm not 100% certain any of the quality of life things actually add to the difficulty other than being able to restock. And we've talked about that pretty thoroughly at this point. Most of the quality of life changes just take out some of the tedious stuff, but they do actually end out in the end reducing your overall immersion in the game. It is cool opening up your map as soon as you go into an area and seeing all the monsters that are currently present. But it would have been pretty immersive if before you would see them, you actually had to have them researched up to a certain point. And sure, you could have all the same features you have now, you just layer them in with a few barriers. Normally, I hate things that act as artificial time gates, but realistically, Wilds is so easy to work your way through the base game that the amount of time it would add to do that stuff would just be things that you could do either at the end game after you finish the main story, or as ways to take a break. One other thing that I really don't like, I don't see a whole lot of people talk about, I don't like the questing structure in this one. I like the older system where you had key quests and then you had optional quests, and you had to finish so many of the key quests to unlock the urgent. The way the current system works is more or less you're just going from urgent to urgent to urgent to urgent. Yeah, they're not labeled as urgents, and your urgents actually end up being things like hunting the apex monsters. But what they do is they don't really give you any time to breathe in an area. What I think they should do instead is every time you do one of the key story quests, unless that part of the story it's really important that you move on to the next one, like, you know, there are a few story beats where they flow straight from one to the next with no real opportunity to squeeze anything in between. If, when it presents itself, they actually required that you complete some of the optional quests to unlock the next one, like you just say, okay, you must help out the locale a little bit before the next quest becomes available, I think it would actually give people time to slow down, farm up some materials, make some armor sets, encourage them to make other armor and weapons. I think that's just a problem with the way they've set it up. They funnel you from spot to spot to spot, and they push you through it so fast, you don't really have time to slow down and absorb everything unless you make yourself do that. And if you're kind of like me, when you have that little thing sitting up in the upper right-hand corner telling you what you should be doing next, you feel a lot of urgency to go ahead and do it. I mean, other than where I've got to at the current point in the game. I don't really care about the eyeglasses and stuff, so I've just been leaving that one there, and I don't really care about finishing the fishing one out for now, so yet again, haven't done it. But as far as the story quests go, I do think they need to figure out some way to at least work something back in from the older system where you had to complete a couple quests before you would functionally move on to the next rank. And then it would also help with this feeling that you're playing at least partially a walking simulator. Because going from quest hub to quest hub to quest, there's a lot of points in this game where you're just having tons of exposition given out and not a lot of time hunting. And the fights were simple enough if you're used to the game that that lack of time hunting makes it feel kind of boring, even if the story overall is probably one of the better ones that we've had. Actually, I guess it'd be fair to say it's probably one of the best developed stories that we've had in the Monster Hunter game. But being forced to sit through it and doing like 20 minutes of story and then 5 minutes of fight just didn't feel good. And it took away from the enjoyment of what should have been probably the most enjoyable story of the series. I can imagine that some people actually do like not having to figure out what the key quests are or figure out their way around that system. But yet again, I think that is one of those things that has actually had quality of life take away from the overall immersion. Okay, so that rounds out what I think are the subjective criticisms. Now, the objective criticism, and the one that I actually think fits with the clickbait title of the video, the thing that's really going to hurt the series, is the poor optimization. There is no way to talk your way around the optimization issues that the PC players have had. PC at this point is probably the single biggest audience for the game. And realistically, Capcom does not have a good history with PC optimization, so yeah, there's something to be said that people should have expected issues at the beginning, but it's one thing to expect there to be issues at the beginning, and it's another thing for them to still be going on this far out from release. Yeah, they've fixed a few things, but you haven't really seen massive fanfare from the game base that they have fixed a lot of stuff. And there's just no excuse for a company as big as Capcom making as much money as they did off of this game from that audience that they would let those issues ride as long as they have. They really need to have one good patch that comes out that addresses a ton of the PC optimization issues, gets it working really well for as many people as humanly possible, and then also make a statement apologizing for it and owning up to it. And realistically, I would say they should expect there to be a drop in initial sales for the expansion to this game, because realistically, the PC people have no reason to trust them at this point, and they're going to want to wait, probably at least, for reviewers to pick up the game and actually tell them, hey, yeah, no, it's working all right for me at this point, but remember, I'm running a super optimized, ultra high-end PC. So that is going to hurt the game way worse than anything else, since you're starting to see the players move way more towards PC and off the consoles, especially since most of the consoles are starting to become nothing but PCs, even though I'm playing on a console. I enjoy them, but I've been playing since the 90s. It's all we really had at that point in time. I had some 2D Doom and Duke Nukem on a PC that you had to actually go to DOS to launch them from, but, you know, most of the games were on my Super Nintendo or my Nintendo or Game Boy. So I keep consoles more because I've been playing consoles forever, but I like PC, and I think PC realistically is the future. As far as I think all the major consoles are slowly just coming towards the point of just becoming specialized PCs. Anyway, that aside, they have to fix that issue, and they have to come up with a way to really get the PC players in. Like, it's going to have to be something along the lines of allowing just a massive open beta for the next game with the final release build available before they can buy people's trust back. Like, they're going to have to get to test it and see that it's working. And then with the next game, they'll have to test it, see that it's working. Because you have to remember, the expansion for this one's going to be running off the base system that Wilds is running off of. So if they fix all the bugs with Wilds, you wouldn't expect necessarily the bugs to pop back up with a game that's just sort of adding on to Wilds, like adding new maps and monsters in, because the core aspects of it should still be the same from one to the next. They're going to have to work to earn PC trust back, or it's going to do a massive amount of damage to the ground that the game has managed to cover. There's no reason it should still be sitting at mostly negative, because I think even with the difficulty issues set aside, I do think most PC players would still rate it as generally positive. They would say it's too easy, but it's still a fun game. That wouldn't garner negative reviews all on its own. The negative reviews, I think, by and large, are due to them just not taking the time to optimize it. And that's going to pan out to be a massive error on Capcom's part. And it's going to cost them in the long run. And I think it's going to cost the series in the long run. Unless they really work to build some trust back up and do some things to fix it. And I'm not even playing on PC. It doesn't affect me. But it's a massive issue. And if you actually care about the series, number one, you want people to be able to play no matter what system they're playing on. Like, the goal should be to get us all playing the game that we love, not gloating that your system works. Anyway, that's just my thoughts on the current state of Monster Hunter Wilds. Feel free to share your thoughts below. Anything that I didn't talk about that you think should be talked about, or anything that I did talk about that you think I'm wrong about, feel free to address it down there. The only thing I would say is try to stay somewhat civil. Capcom seems to kind of listen, but we're not going to be able to get any sort of good message across without actually being able to articulate it in a civil manner. So feel free to discuss. Have a great day, and remember, if I can beat it, so can you.